on divided by L plus KD. So the idea of this equation is just to have an idea about the proportion of occupied receptor. And the proportion is, here this is almost 100%, R total, and here this is the complex. So we have here the proportion of occupied receptors. And the proportion of occupied receptors depends on the concentration of L. If you put an excessive concentration of L, then LR will equal R total, which means that here we will have 100% of occupied receptor. And if you don't put L, you will have 0% occupancy of receptor. So that makes sense. And behind this equation, this equation corresponds to something else, which is an hyperbole. And this is more famous under the name of saturation curves. So we are doing increasing concentration and we are studying the saturation curves. Each time you increase L, you have the chance to increase LR. So you increase the percentage of occupied receptor. Then, what does mean the KD and how can we understand the KD? For instance, here you have the hyperbolic mathematic representation corresponding to this equation, which is, by the way, an hyperbole. So, as I said before, R, sometimes this is P for protein, because it could be an enzyme, it could be a transporter, not only a receptor. Anyway, you have PL on P total, which corresponds to LR on RT. And look at the red curve. For increasing concentration of L, you soon get a maximal binding, so you soon get maximal occupancy of receptor, and the maximum is 1. LR equals R total, so you have 1. And for this ligand here, you approximate 50% of the occupancy and 50% of occupancy of receptor equals the KD. And the KD for the red curve is estimated to be almost 1 nanomolar. It means that the lower the KD, the higher the affinity. With a low KD, it means that you don't need a high concentration of ligand to get the maximal percentage occupancy of the receptor. So now look at the blue curve. The blue curve, you go toward a maximal binding, 100% of binding at higher concentration compared to the red curve. And you can approximate the KD, the 50% occupancy, which goes here at 10 nanomolar. So it means that you have to reach 10 nanomolar to obtain 50% occupancy of your receptor. So the KD is higher compared to the red curve. So this ligand has less affinity compared to the red ligand. And after that, you have the less affinity ligand, which is represented by the green curve here. So, of course, the green curve is not finished. It should go after the screen to reach 100% of occupancy, and the authors of this slide were estimating the KD at 100 nanomolar, but here you, me, everybody cannot determine the KD of the green ligand because we don't have exactly the maximal occupancy. So you have this hyperbolic representation which exactly corresponds to this mathematic formalism equation. Now you can see that it is quite okay for the red curve because you can approximate the maximal occupancy. You can approximate the 50% occupancy for the red and for the blue, but not for the green. Because for the green you need to use a very large scale of concentration for L. And this is not convenient. This is not convenient for the representation. Then, what we do in that case is to express the concentration of L as a logarithm, which becomes the same y-axis. So you go to 1 for 100% occupancy, while the x-axis is expressed as the log of the concentration of L. So it means that you transform the hyperbolic representation as a semi-logarithmic representation, and this gives you a sigmoid. And then the sigmoid allows to limit the scale for the x-axis. So this is convenient, especially if you want to represent some ligand, like in the left part, ligands that are high affinity, compared to ligands that have low affinity. For example, the difference between the red and the green. So here, this is the green curve, and if we had to put the red could be somewhere here, but we could see it, okay? And then determine the concentration, determine 50% occupancy corresponding to the log of the concentration of L allowing to get this 50% occupancy, which means the log of KD. So, do you have some question for this? Is it clear? Not clear?
It's clear, teacher.
Okay. So, anyway, if you have some problems, please speak. And for those who have Scopia, I think you will have to go through your microphone, because I don't know. Normally I have two screens and this one is out. I have only the PowerPoint like you. So good, because I'm learning also pharmacology. So here we are still trying to understand the interaction between a ligand and a receptor.
Teacher,
So, yes.
can you please redo the explanation of sigmoid curve? How do we obtain it?
The sigmoid curve, this is exactly the same thing than the hyperbolic curve, except that instead of expressing the concentration of L in molarity, you express the concentration of L in log of molarity. So it allows to shrink the x-axis. But at the end, this is exactly the same. I mean, if you transform an hyperbolic curve with a semi-logarithmic representation, then you get a sigmoid curve. This is exactly the same, but at the end, while in the hyperbolic representation you can directly have the KD and the the value of KD in molarity, with the sigmoid representation you will have the log of KD, so the log of molarity. For instance, I will be clearer. Let me think. For a KD of 1 nanomolar, for the red curve here, you will have KD of 10 minus 9. 10 minus 9 corresponding to, in logarithmic concentration, to 1 nanomolar. If I express the KD of 10 nanomolar here, I would get, so the blue curve should be somewhere here, like this, so I would get something like 10 minus 8. And for 100 nanomolar, so somewhere here, I would get maybe 10 minus 7. And for 1 micromolar, so quite bad affinity, 10 minus 6. So I put on the internet, on the Moodle platform, an exercise. Sometimes this is stupid, but you can do this and calculate from the KD obtained from hyperbolic representation to the KD obtained from the sigmoid representation. And between you and me, the sigmoid representation is better because you can see on a large scale the behavior of different ligands. Basically, it's simply to transform the KD in log of KD. I mean the concentration into the concentration of into the log of concentration. So you see again in this slide called named selectivity, you can see we will discuss about selectivity, but on the graph you can see that the representation is the log of the drug, so you have sigmoid. And this is especially interesting here because we will think about the distinct behavior or binding capability of one ligand, on different receptors. And you can see that one ligand, a drug X, if you increase the concentration of the drug X, I mean the log of the concentration of the drug X, you will have a full occupancy of receptor A for low concentrations. Then, if you increase the concentration, you will recruit a receptor B, a receptor C, and a receptor D. So, my question is, do you have a selectivity of X toward A, B, C, or D? And you can answer. This is my question. And please argue.
Yes, there is a selectivity.
Continue.
Because if we look at KD, we see that the ligand prefers receptor A more than the others. So his affinity for receptor A is bigger. Thus, his selectivity for receptor A comes first.
Okay. So in what you say, I could also indicate that maybe there is a selectivity of X from B to D. What do you think?
That's right. I guess.
Okay, so at the end, we don't have selectivity.
Well, we can talk here about affinity, no? I mean, the affinity of ligand L for is different from a receptor to another.
Exactly. So, at the end, you can say, okay, we have some difference of affinity for X toward A, B, C, and D, and it looks like the affinity for A is better than the other one. But this is not sufficient, because you can say also that the affinity of X is better for receptor B compared to receptor D. So the selectivity is something else. You could use a very high concentration and then you lose the affinity, the selectivity for A. So the selectivity is a notion that is relative. It is relative of the concentration you are using. It's not because it is written on the paper that your compound is selective that you are using it at a selective concentration. Be careful. So, we can have here a selectivity toward A in a specific range of concentration. If you go at 100% of occupancy of A, which is almost here, then you check here, and this is not good because you maybe have 10% of B already. So you cannot say that the ligand is fully selective if you are using high concentration of your ligand. So, you can have selectivity towards A in certain range of concentration, and I think till somewhere here, before starting to bind on B. So in that case, you could say, I used a preferential ligand at selective concentration. You understand? So this is a purely relative notion. Okay? For instance, I want to stimulate receptor A and B, but not D. In that case, I would use a concentration somewhere here at maximum, which will give me maybe 60 or 70% of receptor B occupancy, 100% of receptor A occupancy, but 0% of receptor D. Again, I could say that I selectively bind on A and B, even if it is not a full occupancy for B, without binding on D. The problem is that I would have to consider also the presence of C. Okay? So the selectivity is relative. And here, indeed, we have a compound that looks like selective, but in a certain range of concentration. This is clear?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. Then, this is the problem of... So here you have some French, so you will learn French. This is good for you. Yes. Posology. So, you have an example of selectivity for antidepressant, and you will understand maybe the problem of antidepressant drug, I mean of old antidepressant drug, and the benefit of the newer ones. So I will go slowly because the table is not clear, is not so clear. So here, this is not the KD, this is the IC50. For the example here, we still did not have seen the IC50, so please consider that this is an approximation of the KD. This is not the KD, but this is something that can be an approximation, and it gives you an idea anyway. On the left part, you have different names of antidepressant drugs, starting by amitriptyline, clomipramine, desipramine, doxepin, fluoxetine, imipramine, etc., etc. These molecules are antidepressants but belong to different class of antidepressant drugs. For instance, amitriptyline is a tricyclic antidepressant drug, while fluoxetine belongs to the family of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So let's see only the difference between the tricyclic antidepressant and fluoxetine. So you have different sites that have been considered. The cholinergic site, the first one here. The adrenergic sites with especially alpha-1 receptors. Here you have alpha-2 receptors. Then we move to histaminergic receptors and especially H1. So why are we looking at this? Because we know that all antidepressant drugs, and especially tricyclic antidepressant drugs, act on cholinergic muscarinic receptors, which induce dry mouth, the anticholinergic effect, dry mouth, and urinary problems, retention. So these are peripheral side effects, but these are side effects. Then the alpha-1 receptor, the adrenergic receptor, can induce orthostatic hypotension. So it's part of the dizziness effect. And the blockade of H1 receptors can induce sedative effects. A last one, ERG channels at the level of the heart can induce arrhythmia. So why I'm speaking about those specific sites? Because they are well known to be bound by amitriptyline with quite high affinity, here 60 nanomolar, alpha-1 20 nanomolar, and H1 20 nanomolar. These affinities are even better than the ones that are needed to reach the target that is important for the therapeutic benefit. And I mean the noradrenergic and serotonergic transporters. So you know that if you take an tricyclic antidepressant drug, because those drugs have high affinity for cholinergic, adrenergic and histaminergic receptors, you will have side effects. So in that case, we cannot speak about selectivity, of course. And when you are looking at fluoxetine here, you see that fluoxetine has a bad affinity for cholinergic muscarinic receptors, a bad affinity for alpha-1 and alpha-2 receptors, and no affinity for histaminergic receptors. Then fluoxetine reach and binds selectively serotonin transporter. At the end, we know also that it binds something else. Like in your fridge. So it depends on the protocol. And
Sourdine. Muted.
but you have at the equilibrium also the L, the L free, the free L, which is radio labeled, and you have also something that you don't want to have, but you have it. This is the binding of L on something else. So at the end, if you count the radioactivity, you will count the radioactivity of LR, you will have the contribution of LS that you don't want but it is here, and L. So to get rid of free, you filter your preparation. So I don't know, it can be membranes or something like that. So you filter, and then L is removed. But you cannot do something else than counting the radioactivity which correspond to the species LR, the species of interest, and LS, which is the non-selective binding. You understand? Okay, so we have here the total binding. And then we have to find a way to prevent the contribution not of LS, because LS you don't exactly know what it is. But LR you know, because you are interested by the binding of L on R. So you can occlude R with the same ligand or another ligand that you know that it binds on R. So you get rid of R, and at the end you count the radioactivity, which should represent only the non-selective binding. So I am explaining this, and I will be more practical with some drawings. So, determining the real saturation curve on the next slide. You have the binding of L on LR, so the occupancy of the receptor, according to the increasing concentration of radio-labeled L. So you can access experimentally only at two things. The first one is the total binding, which gives you something like this, and then an increase, a progressive increase that you don't know what it is, except that you know that this is probably the non-selective binding. And you can measure also experimentally by protecting R against the binding of radio-labeled L, so you can access the non-selective binding. Here you have the total binding and the non-selective binding, and the difference for all the concentration of L, the difference is LR, which is the parameter of interest. Then for each concentration you withdraw the non-selective binding, and you get on the right side here the specific binding, which reach a saturation, of course, because you cannot have more than 100% of binding, because No, you can, but normally you should not have 100, more than 100% because this is the maximal present of the receptor. And with this, you can estimate, you can know directly access to the 100% occupancy and the 50% occupancy, allowing you to determine the KD. So this is experimental. And I know that you don't do this kind of experiments, so I plan to be a little bit more precise. I mean, you come with me in a specific room where we manipulate radioactivity, and those rooms are less and less available. Anyway, I think there are no better way to address the KD of a ligand toward one receptor. So, experimentally, you take different things. It can be this, look at this. Look at this, how ugly it is. Okay, you agree with me? This is ugly. But it could represent fragment of cells, membranes, etc., where you have a functional receptor. Or it could be something like this, which is my way of drawing a brain slice. This is beautiful, no? Anyway, it can be this. It can be done also on, you have those heterologous expression systems like fibroblast, H293 cells, HEK cells, CHO cells for Cillian ovarian, Cillian hamster ovarian, I don't remember exactly, but CHO anyway, and PC12, etc. So you can give the mRNA, and those cells will express the receptor and put the receptor at the membrane, and then you can also do some binding experiments. So you have different possibilities. I prefer the endogenous system. So from fragment of cells, I don't know, from the cortex or striatum or whatever, or directly on slices. So, you are using dishes. On this, inside the dishes, you put first the medium. The medium is, in fact, a buffer. So the buffer depends also on the protocol, and it is often specific for the ligand you want to bind on the receptor. So the first dish here, you put only the slice or the membrane fragment and the buffer, and you don't add the radiolabeled L. So, for 0, you are not expecting radioactivity at the end, but it has to be done. Then, you do a dish with a buffer, and you dilute L, so that at the end you have 1 nanomolar concentration of L. you are waiting for, I don't know, 30 minutes. Then you filter and you count the radioactivity. You are doing this with another dish and you put L at 3 nanomolar. Equilibrium, measurement of radioactivity. The same at 10, 30, 100, and it can continue. For some ligand, this is already almost finished here, so maybe you have to use another range, and for some ligand, you will need higher concentration. Anyway, I hope you understand this, and with this, you can get the total binding. Then, you are doing exactly the same for measuring the non-specific binding, but you are doing the same, and you pay the same attention and care for the non-specific binding. Otherwise, you cannot access the specific binding. So you do the same. But in that case, you are using a cold ligand that you know it binds on the receptor, and you put it in excess. So you are doing this, and the first concentration here is 0 for L, for radio-labeled L. So normally you should not have radioactivity, but again you have to do it. Then you put the buffer containing also L prime in excess, and you dilute your radio-labeled L at 1 nanomolar. You wait the same for the equilibrium, and then you measure the radioactivity. And you do the same for all concentrations. And normally here you don't expect so much radioactivity, because normally L prime prevent the binding L on the side of interest, R. But L could also target something else that you don't know, and you have to measure it. So the values obtained in total binding minus the values in the non-specific binding experiment gives you the specific binding. So is that clear? Can you visualize how you could do to get the KD?
Teacher?
Yes?
We didn't get how we get the values of non-specific binding.
The values are the same, except that you put at the same time another ligand. So, imagine you have your receptor and another ligand, L prime, that you know that bind on the receptor. You put L prime in excess, for instance, I don't know, 1 micromolar, 10 micromolar. So, it means that L prime will occupy at 100% the receptor. In this condition, it is likely that radio-labeled L won't reach R. So you are doing exactly the same experiment, and you are measuring also the radioactivity, except that in that case, you know that the radioactivity that you will get won't come from the LR interaction because it is not possible. So basically the non-specific binding, you occlude the site of interest. It's like you remove it and then you calculate the non-selective binding. Is that clear?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay. This corresponds to autoradiographic procedure, quantitative autoradiography. To do that, so you might recognize a little bit slice of brains, and these are brains of monkeys. So on this slide you see that you have different density from black to white inside the slice, and it corresponds to distinct labeling and regional binding of different ligands in A, B, C, and D. So this is called quantitative autoradiography because when we do this, we have a scale for radioactivity, so you can appreciate the density of labeling. I tell you this because this is less used nowadays, but no technique can do this. If you are doing immunohistochemistry, you don't have access to density. You can have density once you have a scale and once you have a specific binding, etc., etc. So, you have the labeling, in fact, of the serotonin 2A receptor subtype, okay, which is a receptor for the neurotransmitter serotonin. And then those authors used radiolabeled MDL in A, radiolabeled ketanserin, radiolabeled RP 62203 in C, and radiolabeled mesulergine in D. So, at least for the three first radiolabeled ligands, they should label the same site. And do we have the same things? So I'm expecting you now to speak and to comment. Do we have the same display, the same information, even if the MDL, ketanserin, and RP should bind on the same receptor, and maybe you could use the non-specific binding, which is in A prime, B prime, and C prime, to argue And at the end, I will ask, what is the best ligand in this experiment?
Teacher?
Yes.
I think A.
You think A. And my question is, why?
Because we don't have a non-specific binding in A prime. Prime.
Okay. And for B and C?
We have some non-specific binding.
Okay. So you would use MDL for your experiment.
Yes, teacher.
Okay, so you are a rich man, but I agree. I do agree. So, in all cases, you have in ABC something which is quite similar, at least in the labeling in the cortex. But in A, you can see that the labeling is sharper, more precise compared to something like C, where this is fuzzy. Moreover, in B, you are labeling the caudate putamen, while in A, you are not, or very poorly labeling the caudate putamen. Okay, so we have a problem here. We have an issue. But when you are doing the non-specific binding with a ligand, a co-ligand in excess, in A prime, the binding is totally removed. So it means that probably what we see on A is close to the specific binding. While in B prime, you can see that something is still present, especially in the caudate putamen. So it means that we have a huge labeling in the caudate putamen that won't be associated to serotonin 2A receptors, but which would be due to the binding of ketanserin on something else. And in fact, we know that ketanserin is able to, with high affinity, to bind on the tetrabenazine site, which basically correspond to the monoamine vesicular transporter, VMAT, that we will see later. But that's the reason why we have a huge labeling in the striatum, caudate putamen, and a faint labeling but still present in the cortex. And C, I don't know why it is so fuzzy. It is a little bit fuzzy, and it labels something else also. And at the end, this is a uniform non-selective binding. So in D can label serotonin 2A receptors, but the main part is serotonin 2C receptors. And serotonin 2C receptors can have a higher representation in coded putamen compared to the cortex. And the most important labeling you don't see here. I mean, yes, you see it here. This is in the choroid plexus. The density in the choroid plexus is maybe 18 times higher compared to other brain regions. So, but this is for serotonin 2C receptors. Okay, so you are bright. Good. So, back on this. It was the first slide showing a graph with the total binding, the non-specific binding, and the specific binding. But if you are here, look at the yellow curve, you will have huge difficulties to get to obtain the KD. Let me check. Maybe the maximal binding is here. So divide by 2, it should be 225. 225 is here. So this is 50% binding. This and this. And you see that it is not really clear. Could be 0.1 nanomolar, but this is not clear. Okay, so the KD is not that precise if we want to determine it with only the hyperbole or even the sigmoid representation. Then, is there a better way to determine the KD? And for those of you who did already enzyme or something like that, or pharmacology also, they won't like what is coming, and for the other ones, maybe they won't like also what is coming. But what is coming is simply a way to take mathematical arguments of hyperbole and to transform it in straight line. So y equals ax plus b. That's it. So this is a representation of Scatchard. Sometimes I succeed to go from here to here. This is logical when you know where you have to go. So to transform an hyperbole into a straight line, even if it is stupid. So B, which is LR, B for bound, on F equals minus 1 on KD times bound plus B max, this is R total, on KD. So this is stupid because, by the way, this is not the kind of parameter you are thinking of. But at the end, you have a straight line where minus 1 on KD is the slope. So, to get the KD, you just have to calculate the slope of the straight line. And it gives you, for instance, this. So, B on F in femtomole per essay and nanomolar concentration, and you plot here B in femtomole per assay. So when B is at 0, this is not exactly B because this is B on KD. Anyway, after counting for each concentration and after removing the non-specific binding, you have the specific binding, and for each concentration you have a bound on F value and a B value. So you can starting to plot the Scatchard plot. Normally it gives you something like a straight line with one side, and the slope of the curve of the straight line corresponds to minus 1 on KD. Sorry. So this is the best way to obtain the KD. So, and there is one advantage that sometimes you cannot see, usually you don't see with hyperbole representation. For instance, here you plot the different value B on F according to B. Then you have this, a dot here, a dot here, a dot, a dot, a dot, a dot, a dot, and it is clear that it does not correspond to a straight line, which may suggest that the more you are increasing the concentration, the more you recruit another site with a lower binding affinity. And you can determine it by saying, okay, I will select those dots, and indeed I have a straight line, and those dots, I have another straight line. And the slope is completely different in between the two binding sites. Here minus 38 and here minus 3. So with the representation of Scatchard, you can determine the existence of different sites. Here you have another example. I will take this one. I think it is nice. Example 4 before example 3. It's weird anyway. Example 4. B max you have one value, and KD you have the value that are here obtained. It's difficult to obtain here because you don't know exactly where you go. So I would like to say 450, so again 255, 255, this, and this. So my estimation of the KD is lower than their calculation. And if you do the Scatchard plot, means that you have sufficient values, you will be able to calculate the slope of the curve, which will correspond precisely to 1 kd. In the example 3, this is the receptor for glucocorticoid, and you have two different receptors, or and or they can adopt distinct conformation modifying the affinity of a ligand. So they did the experiment, a lot of dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You need at least 8 to do a good scatter chart. So here 11, this is good. And at the end they found 2 relationships, one with high affinity, because the slope is very high, so you have a high affinity, and here with low affinity. Okay, so this is almost the same in B, so I switch this example. So you can see the advantage using the KD. There is another point, because we spoke about the full occupancy. No, I start because I had emails, and as I told you, I will have to shorten the course. So anyway, let me think how I can put the representation of Hill. So I don't know your knowledge on this, but if you have one receptor, you can estimate that you have one binding site. You agree? Why not? But sometimes you don't know. At the end, it does not correspond to 100% occupancy. This is weird. And sometimes you have twice. You double the percentage occupancy. What does it mean? It means that your receptor can bind 2 ligands. Does it exist? Yes. For instance, nicotinic receptors. You have at least 2 alpha subunits, and if I remember correctly, acetylcholine is binding on alpha. And then, so it means that for the same receptor, you can have 2 binding sites. And this is a good example because so if you have 2 binding sites, how do you know if the binding on the first binding site won't have an effect on the ability of the ligand to bind on the second binding site? Why not? And it exists. So you have the representation of Hill, which is exactly the percentage of occupancy of receptors. So B on B max, or RL on RT, if you want, equals L divided by L plus KD. But L has a factor N, H, which is the coefficient of Hill. So instead, for instance, if you have L equals 1, then sometimes you have the coefficient of Hill that gives you L equals 0.8 or 0.5 or 1.4. So it means that you have that the binding of the ligand on the receptor has consequences on the binding of the same ligand on, I don't know, the same receptor or other receptors. And you have this relationship. Again, you can play and go from there to there, but I'm not expecting this. And you can have at the end log the B on B max minus B. This is just to get a linearization equals NH times log of L minus log KD. So in order for you to have a better idea of the coefficient of Hill, we can check on the next slide without title, where I report the equation and the corresponding graph. So you have log of B minus on B max minus B times log of the concentration of L. Then you have different, you did the measurement at different concentration, you report your calculation for this, and you obtain a slope. And the slope corresponds to the coefficient of Hill. Usually, you are happy when the coefficient of Hill equals 1. When it is over 1, I don't know, 1.4, 2, whatever, it means that you have some phenomenon of cooperativity. For instance, imagine a ligand binding on the receptor, and then it facilitates the binding of another ligand on the same, on similar receptor. So it enhances the affinity for the receptor. Cooperativity. And sometimes you have negative cooperativity. So the binding of one ligand prevent or limit the access of the ligand on the receptor. Don't forget also something. You imagine, I think, in your mind, one receptor alone, but we now know that receptors are at least as dimers. We have a lot of examples that even 7 transmembrane receptors are dimers or form homomers or heterodimers or oligomers. This is complicated. And you can imagine that if they cooperate like this, they form dimers. You can imagine that the binding of one ligand will have modification on the other ligand. I don't know if you have the representation. Anyway, my job is to tell you that we have some way to determine if we have cooperativity phenomenon. And the most famous example of cooperativity, this is not for receptors, this is for an enzyme. An enzyme, no, we can say this is a receptor, this is hemoglobin to carry on oxygen. So the binding is dependent on the partial pressure of oxygen, and of course it depends where you are in the tissue. So in the lung you have a high partial pressure of oxygen, while in peripheral tissue you have a low partial pressure of oxygen. And this is the difference between the two that allows for carry on at the level of the lung oxygen, and then to distribute oxygen in the tissue, even far, far away. Except in my case, because I probably have problems of circulation, but this is not of your business. Okay, so you express, so you have the example of two enzymes. Here, myoglobin, and myoglobin is only one subunit capable of binding oxygen. And then you have hemoglobin, and if you remember correctly, hemoglobin has 4 subunits. In the case of myoglobin, you express just as we saw before, so except that here they express differently, Y corresponding to B. So this is like this, and here this is according to the partial pressure of oxygen. And you can see that with myoglobin there is a slope of 1. But in case of hemoglobin, you start at 1, and soon you get a slope at 2.8. So this is a sort of phenomenon of cooperativity. So you are no longer at 1, but you are recruiting other sites. And then at the end, when you are saturating, you go back to 1. So you have a cooperativity phenomenon. So I don't speak about the example on the right side, because this is pharmacology, but I don't exactly remember what it is. So don't forget, but I think you may have seen this during your, bachelor or master courses. This is sort of enzymology. Then, okay, so what we have to know from my side is the KD. So to have an idea about the way you are measuring the KD, to know what is NH, the coefficient of Hill, and to know also what is the benefit of Scatchard. If you want to be an expert, you can, from the equation from the hyperbole, try to find the path to get the linearization. For me, this is expert. But if you know already what you are talking about, this is okay for me. And now I will explain something. We already spoke about IC50. Something that is usually difficult to understand for you. Because experimentally, it's rare that we are measuring the KD. And then, please transform yourself in chemist. I know this is weird, but be a chemist for some minutes, a chemist working in the pharmaceutical industry. You are playing with molecules. You are adding, I don't know, a phenol, you are adding methyl, you are adding, like we saw last week, acetyl. You are playing. You are so playing. You are playing a lot, and you are generating a lot of compounds. Based on one compound, you can generate 100 or 1000 compounds. You play. And what you are doing with those compounds? Now you produce, you synthesize those compounds on purpose, and you have to select them. Means you have to select those which have the best profile. And to do this, you need to measure the profile of those compounds. Do you think that it will be serious for each new compounds to put them radiolabeled? This is not serious and very expensive. Then, we are using an indirect method to get the KD. And in fact, we won't add directly the KD of one new drug or an inhibitor, in fact. Directly the KD, we will get the Ki, the constant of dissociation for a new compound. And experimentally, you have to figure out that, okay, I will use the protocol that is classical. We always use, in all laboratories, the same radiolabeled drug concentration with the same preparation, so that we know the KD of the radiolabeled compound, etc., etc. And what we will measure is the displacement of the drug, of the radiolabeled drug, with a new compound. And the new compound on this slide is called I for inhibitor. But at the end it can be what you want. So inhibitor here, because if it is present, it might inhibit the formation of LR. So now the law of mass action is a little bit more complicated because you have two distinct species. The formation of LR with radiolabeled compound and R. So it means that I can bind R so that it removes a little bit of a variable R for radiolabeled L. But it follows also the law of mass action for I. So you have the KD here, which is L times R on LR, and the KI here, which is I times R on IR. Experimentally, if you don't have I, you will stay at 100% occupancy of L on LR. But if you put a little bit of I, you will reduce progressively the percentage of occupied receptor LR on RT. And this is a famous equation that you have to know from Cheng and Prusov. They were interested by, I don't know, bacteria and antibiotics, something like that. And for screening, because this is screening, they developed this methodology where experimentally, what do you have? You have the IC50. The IC50 is the concentration of the ligand that inhibits occupied receptor L. So this is a concentration of the inhibitor, displacer, whatever, allowing to displace 50% of the initial binding. And then Cheng and Prusov said, okay, if we have this experimental value, then, because we know, here this is a Km, but please consider that this is a Kd. Because we know the Kd of L for R, because we are using this for years, we have been using this for years, so we can obtain with the following relationship, IC50 equals Ki times 1 plus S for substrate, but L for ligand on Kd. This is the parameter that is important. Sometimes it is close to IC50, it depends on the protocol, but this is this is a constant. This is not a constant. the affinity of different compounds on alpha 2 and alpha 1 receptors. So, as you can see here, you have the alpha 2 with clonidine and alpha 1 with prazosin. They measured both IC50 and Ki. That's the reason why I put this, because you can have sort of comparison between the two. But it means that, for instance, they use clonidine to remove clonidine. But clonidine, non-radiolabeled clonidine, and to check the outcome on the radio-labeled clonidine binding. And they found that clonidine, with almost a concentration of 3.1 micromolar, was able to displace 3H clonidine. And it corresponds almost to the same concentration for the Ki. So it means that the authors probably used a concentration of radiolabeled clonidine close to the Kd of clonidine towards alpha-2 receptors. And you can see that clonidine here has bad affinity, quite bad affinity, less than 1 micromolar toward alpha-1 receptors. If you look at prazosin, so this time cold prazosin, cold means no radioactivity, a bad affinity for alpha-2 receptors and a strong affinity for alpha-1 receptors. So prazosin is able to displace prazosin. And then you have, you will check different compounds. This is not really important here. Some of them present selectivity toward alpha 2 versus alpha 1, and this is represented here. The Ki of alpha 1 on Ki on alpha 2. So when it is high, it means that this is, according to the arguments here, when this is high, it means that this is a preferential alpha-2 receptor, and when this is extremely low, it means that this is a preferential alpha-1 ligand. So nowadays you will see that alpha-2 and alpha-1 are, each subtypes different subtypes also. So it is more complicated. But at that time, here was the deal. And I will finish here for today. So do you have some questions?
No, teacher, thank you.
So it means that without seeing me, it was clear also. Okay, so next week we will have 2 courses. Normally I will have a less busy schedule, but here today we have seen some way of appreciating the interaction of one ligand toward the receptor, and next week we will go to the consequence of this interaction, and the consequence, this is the beginning, strong beginning of pharmacology. In fact, the consequence of stimulating or blocking a receptor on cell activity toward or to up to change of behaviors, which is a fascinating part of pharmacology. So, I said to you, good day and good week. Don't forget to give me names of groups, please, so that I can build the group. I can give duties. Okay?
Okay, sir.
So,
Have a good day, sir.
thank you very much for your attention and see you next week. Bye.